Okay, seeing as we haven't had a new attendee join for a minute or so, I figure we'll get started now. So first up, thank you all very much for joining us on this webinar called Be the One, Identifying and Helping Victims of Domestic Abuse. My name's Kyle Smith. I'm a public educator who works for Halton Women's Place. I'm joined by two of my colleagues, Connor Spears.
Hi, everyone.
And Kirsten Boyle.
Hi, everyone.
They'll be answering any questions you have. If you've got a question about the presentation, feel free to just type it in the Q&A. They'll answer it, and if there's anything particularly prominent or that hasn't been cleared up, we can address that at the end. But for the moment, we'll get started. So the title and the subtitle kind of tell you what we're going to be talking about today. But we like to stress why we have this sort of conversation, why it's important to talk about. And unfortunately, it's because women are dying in Canada on an alarmingly regular basis because of domestic violence. So you see there the statistic is every 6 days. And in fact, the Globe and Mail recently published an article that said in the last 34 days, 9 women and girls have been killed as a result of domestic violence, which is shocking. And that's why we're giving this presentation, hopefully to provide some people some information that might help in some situations. If we look in the Halton region, you'll see that in the last year, the police responded to 33,000 calls related to intimate partner violence. And that's even more shocking when you consider the fact that a large amount of domestic violence incidences never get reported. So there's a huge amount happening in the Halton community, and that's evident in those statistics. In terms of what we at the shelter do, Halton Women's Place, we've assisted 152 women and 139 children who stayed with us in shelter over the last year. We received almost 2,000 crisis calls, which is a call when there is an actual crisis going on. So not only is domestic violence a real problem across Canada, but particularly within our community of Halton as well. So over the course of this presentation, we're going to provide some ideas, some advice on how to help someone, and we've broken it down into 4 sections. First one is see it. This is basically what to look out for. What can you possibly spot or see that would help you identify that someone is being abused? Naming it, which is trying to figure out if what you've seen is something to be concerned about, something to take further steps towards, or if there is an explanation for it that isn't abuse. And then there's check it. So that's checking if your assumptions are accurate. And then finally, our last one is taking some action. What could you do? A lot of what we're talking about has got stuff related to the lockdown, to COVID-19, because unfortunately that has made the situation even more complex. So that's all in there. That's how we're going to do it. So before we get to see it, though, we are going to talk about what abuse is, and then how to sort of spot it a little bit more. So when we talk about seeing it, we're very much, you'll see there the picture of the iceberg. We're talking about what's the tip of the iceberg. You won't see most of the abuse that happens. You'll just see a few things here and there. Unfortunately, what's happening is there's likely more going on in their life. So we're going to go over the warning signs, what to see. But basically, pay attention to the people around you, people in your life, and you might see some of these signs. And basically, if that makes you feel suspicious or if it makes you feel uncomfortable, doesn't feel right, listen to your gut, because that, even if it could be explained by something that's not abuse or not domestic violence, it's still something to take seriously just in case it is. So please treat your suspicions, your concerns very, very seriously if you ever feel like something isn't right. This is a wheel we use to sort of explain what power or what abuse is. And there are so many different variations of it. They all look slightly different. But you'll see the main components are the same in pretty much all of them. At the middle is power and control in the center, because that is what all abusive relationships are about. The abuser wants to control the person that they're abusing. They want to control their behavior, who they see, maybe the way they dress, whatever it is, they feel like they deserve that control. and they use these abusive tools to gain that control. Now, one of the first things you'll notice about this particular wheel is that physical abuse isn't even on it. And I really want to stress that, because a lot of what we're taught when it comes to, say, movies and TV shows, and when we're taught about domestic abuse young, is to look for bruises, for injuries. We think of physical abuse. I want to stress that it's entirely possible that someone could come into our shelter, have experienced horrible abuse, and never to have been physically harmed. And that might mean that the warning signs that we're typically taught to look for, like bruises, injuries, they might never appear. You have to look for some other sort of red flags that abuse is occurring. And by all means, this wheel is a good sort of starting point to look at certain ways that someone could abuse someone, but there are lots on here that are not in that, there are lots that are not included in this wheel, including things like spiritual abuse, physical abuse, psychological abuse. This is merely just some of the ones that whoever designed this wheel thought these are the most important or prominent ones. So, as I stressed earlier, I just want to say that abuse is so much more than physical abuse. And that the key component is the trying to control his partner. That's the key component. Someone is trying to control what their partner does, how they do it, and they use abuse as a means of gaining that control. Now, this is where we come to one that's unfortunately become particularly prominent because of the lockdown. Now, it's obviously a big and important part of abuse normally without COVID-19, but because of the lockdown, it's made it almost easier for an abuser to isolate their partner from their friends, from their family. And you'll see there at the bottom, but you could be someone's lifeline, because in this time where someone might never see anyone, it's already difficult enough for people in non-abusive situations. But just by staying in contact, by keeping that sort of connection, you might be that one sort of lifeline they have to the outside world, the one sort of escape they have from their abuser at home. But it is important that if you're contacting or connecting with someone, that you are aware of her safety, especially say if you're sending text messages like, oh, just leave him. You need to be aware that that's a digital footprint and that she might not have control of her phone. She might not have control of her privacy, of her technology. And now her abuser's seen that, and now she's in danger because of that text message. So that is something to be aware of, and we're going to sort of address that a bit further on. But even when you are trying to connect with someone, you do have to be aware of their safety and if you could potentially be putting them in danger. So I'm going to have a look at the warning signs. And there's a lot here. If at any point you miss some, you didn't hear it or you didn't see it, we are recording this, and you'll be able to go back on the recording and have a look at these if you want. We'll post that recording in the next few days. But you'll see here, these are some of the warning signs you might have seen in the past, you might see now, or perhaps you might see in the future, but it's always important to look for these. There's some ones that might seem relatively obvious, like putting her down, always checking up on her, acts as if he owns her. But there are some other ones that you might not have noticed or might not have connected with domestic violence, like the abuser doing all the talking, dominating the conversation, checking up on her all the time, like constantly checking up on her. Perhaps the abuser tries to suggest he's the victim, that she's the one hurting him. Trying to keep her away from you, that isolating aspect. Perhaps he lies to make himself look good or exaggerates how good he is, and he might act as though he's superior to everyone else in his home, his kids, his wife, maybe even his parents. All these things are warning signs, and I've got a few more pages of them as well, so this is by no means it all. There's some other ones. She might become apologetic. She might make excuses for his behavior that you would, you'd say, how could you possibly excuse that? But she excuses it because for her it's not necessarily abuse, or because she doesn't want to make him upset. She might get nervous talking when he's there, right? You might notice that the way she discusses, you're having a fun, lighthearted conversation, and all of a sudden it changes when he comes home. She might be sick more often. She might be trying to cover up her bruises, either with clothing or with makeup. She might make excuses at the last minute. So, oh, I'm sorry, I can't meet you. I've got blah, blah, blah. Or she tries to avoid you. She might seem sad, lonely, withdrawn, or afraid. And she might, start using alcohol more or drugs more to cope. So if you notice that she's drinking a bit more, that is, again, it isn't a sign that abuse is happening in itself, but it is a sign that you need to start looking a little bit more and trying to see if there's anything else that can connect. Now, I have a couple that are COVID-19 specific. Unfortunately, this lockdown has changed the way we live, and it's also unfortunately changed the situation for many people living in an abusive relationship. So it might be that she no longer shows up for work. Perhaps her partner is using COVID as an excuse to isolate her, bring her, no, you can't go, you'll put us all in danger, so on and so forth. She might stop returning messages and calls, right? You text her, you never get a response. You call, you just get voicemail all the time. It might be possible that during a phone call, she suddenly will become quiet or distracted, and there's no explanation for that. And it might be that, again, she seems sad, lonely, or afraid. All of these are warning signs that someone might be being abused. Now, none of them are necessarily conclusive, right? You might see one of these signs and there's a perfectly reasonable explanation for it. But if you see one of these signs, it will probably make you feel a bit odd, a bit uncomfortable, and it's something you should take seriously. Until you can rule it out as non-abuse, you should be thinking, okay, so what can I do? And we'll talk about that next. That's the name it sort of part. But before we do, I want to talk about the signs of high risk. Now, these are the signs that if someone's in an abusive relationship, they have a high risk of being seriously hurt or killed. If you notice any of these with someone you think might be being abused, I would strongly encourage you to contact your local shelter, the Assaulted Women's Hotline, and talk to the person, the social worker on the end of their phone, and get their expert advice, because the risk can lead to death, as we saw at the beginning. These signs need to be taken seriously. And again, just like the red flags, there's quite a lot of them. So someone might be at high risk of being seriously hurt or being killed if her partner has access to her and her kids. If he's got access to her, that means that he could do her harm. If he has access to weapons, particularly firearms, but obviously non-firearm weapons are still something to be considered. If he has a history of abuse with her or with others. If he's threatened to harm or kill her if she leaves him, the line, if I can't have you, no one will. If you leave me, I'll kill you. Those threats, the moment they're uttered, is something that needs to be taken absolutely seriously. Same thing if he threatens to harm her kids, her pets, or her property. I'll burn down your house, I'll destroy your car, I'll kill the dog, sort of thing. Those threats need to be taken seriously. And if he's uttering them, that's already a sign that's high risk. If he's threatened to kill himself, if in the past he's hit her or choked her, and if he's going through major life changes, losing a job, separating, if he's suffering from depression, obviously going through the lockdown right now would count as well. Those would all be things that increase the risk. In addition, she's also at a risk if she's just separated or if she's planning to leave. The most dangerous time for a woman in an abusive relationship is the year after she leaves her partner. That year is incredibly dangerous. If she fears for her life or her children's safety, then that's a sign that she's in danger. Also, if she can't see the risk, that you can see all these high-risk signs, all the warnings, but she thinks it's absolutely fine and she treats it without any sort of concern for her safety, that could be a sign of risk as well. If she's in a custody battle, or even if she just has kids from a previous relationship, so there's stepkids involved, that can make it more dangerous as well. If she's involved in another relationship, whether her abusive partner is her ex and now she's joined a new relationship, or if she's having an affair, that can also make much higher risk. If she's got unexplained injuries, if she doesn't have access to a phone, there are lots of other obstacles. If she doesn't speak English, if she's not yet a resident of Canada, if she lives in a rural area, all of those obstacles also make her at higher risk, as does if she has no friends or family to support her. These can increase the risk. So if at any point you see these and you think your partner's or your friend is being abused, this is where I encourage you to contact Halton Women's Place, contact the Assaulted Women's Hotline, and talk to them. They will be able to give you some advice. They'll be able to hopefully help a lot more with that situation than a webinar can. Now, once you've seen these warning signs, once you've seen, this red flag, I think she might be being abused, you need to do what they call name it. You need to name it to yourself, and you need to name it to others. Now, this doesn't mean that you jump to conclusions, it must be abuse. It's more that you have a look and see what you do know and what you don't know. What do you know for sure? So you'll see here it's important that you don't speculate, you don't gossip, that you focus on the facts, what you have actually seen and what you've actually heard. Don't fill in the blanks. So don't go, he must be assaulting her, hitting her every single day, sort of thing. You don't know that for sure. You just need to focus on what you do know. I saw she was covering her neck with a turtleneck even though it was warm weather. Basically, what the purpose of this stage is basically to see if what you've seen, what you've heard, what's made you feel uncomfortable could be abuse or not. So basically, if you cannot rule out abuse, if there's no other explanation that completely gets rid of abuse, then you need to talk to someone you trust, a professional, to help decide what's next. And again, this is one thing you'll see, I'm going to stress this a lot throughout this presentation, is contact Halton Women's Place, contact the Assaulted Women's Hotline, contact an expert. If at any point, they will be able to give you the best advice. That's their job. They know what they're doing. Contact them and they'll be able to tell you how to help. Now, once you've named it, once you're like, okay, I'm pretty sure this is abuse, I've got these red flags, this is what I've seen, this is where you check the assumptions. This is where you go, and if it's safe, you talk to the person being abused, you talk to her. If it's possible, if it's safe, bring materials to talk to her about, some online resources. And there are lots of resources online. And again, when you talk to her, just what you've seen, just what you know for sure. Don't fill in the gaps, don't try and guess what's happening, only the things you know for certain. And I'll talk about that in a little bit, how you can do that. But for the moment, I just want to talk about what an emergency is. So if at any point it's an emergency, call the police. And so when we say an emergency, if you think the woman is in physical danger of being hurt or being killed, immediately call 911. This might be the person that you know. This might be someone, your next door neighbor. If you hear things like shouting, screams, threats, if you hear sounds of violence, if you hear long bangs, you hear destruction, call the police straight away. The Halton Regional Police has a number of police officers and their job is to deal with domestic violence. You're better off calling them than letting the violence escalate. Worst comes to worst, the police show up and nothing was happening. Trust your gut. And we'll talk about code words in a second, but perhaps your friend sends you a code word saying that they're in danger. Call 911. That's the first point of call. If someone's in danger, call the police. But if they're not in immediate danger and you're able to have a conversation one-on-one with her, this is where you sort of check that what you've seen, is it actually abuse? Now, the first thing I'm going to say is that this is a really difficult conversation. It is not going to be easy. It's going to be difficult emotionally. It's going to be difficult just to sort of stay on the topic and to say exactly what you mean to say and nothing else. But again, fill in the facts. So the example I've given here is, I'm worried about you because I saw bruises on your neck. I'm worried about you because your partner's always checking in on you at work. He calls 3-4 times a day. By doing that, saying something like, I'm worried about you, it's not saying, you're not telling them, oh, you're being abused. You're not telling them it's all horrible. You're just saying, like, this is something that's concerning. This is something that I'm feeling. This is something that I've seen that's made me think about it this way. Now, during this conversation, it's important to be open and non-judgmental. And this is easier said than done, to be fair. But you've got to remember that whatever the situation is, you don't know all the details. and she's making the best decision for her at the time. Even if it doesn't feel like it for you, you need to remember that this is her choice, her decisions, and we'll talk about that in a little bit in the next couple of slides. But you need to not judge what decision she's making, how she feels about her abuser, and so on. Be open and non-judgmental. Even if all that does is it means that she's going to be more open and honest with you rather than becoming defensive. And one thing I'd say that it's really important to do is remind her it's not her fault. There's nothing she could do to deserve being abused. Right? There's absolutely nothing someone could do that it's not her fault. Now, this conversation might not go well. She might deny the abuse. She might say, "Oh, I'm not being abused." She might try and protect him. "Oh, you're seeing it wrong. He's not doing that. He's really a good guy," etc., etc. She might become defensive. She might start, no matter what, you're always wrong. No matter what you've seen, you're not right. She might even become aggressive. She might start verbally attacking you, telling you you're wrong. And it's important to note she might not be ready to talk about it. She might not be ready to have this discussion. She might not be ready to accept that what's happened to her is abuse. And there are so many reasons for that, and we'll come to some of those in the future. But you need to accept that and to not judge that. Now, even if this conversation doesn't go well, it doesn't mean that it hasn't done some good. So remember to respect her decision. She might not be ready to leave him. She might not be ready to even talk about it. And there are lots of reasons why she might not be ready to leave or to talk about her abuse. And we'll cover some of those. What you need to think of that conversation as is opening a door. Even if she doesn't accept that she's being abused, even if she potentially becomes aggressive and starts insulting you, if you think about the fact that you've talked to her about it, and then you can give her the option to come back to you whenever she wants. So it might be something you say, "I'm free to talk whenever you want. Call me if you want to talk. I'm always here for you if you need it. Whatever you need, please call me." By doing that, if right now she's not ready to leave, not ready to accept that she's being abused, perhaps later in line she will be, and then you'll be the person that she'll be able to go to. She'll know, "Oh, I can go see Kyle about this. He talked to me about it. He'll be there for me if I need it." You're basically leaving the option for them to come to you at some other time. So you can help someone even if it doesn't feel like you're able to do much. I've had a few conversations with people who've trying to help someone who's being abused, and it feels like they're helpless, like there's nothing that they can do. Even the little things can help. Checking in on her might be something that makes a difference. They do make a difference, these small little things. The few times I've heard survivors' testimony about what they've gone through, they talk about how the little things, how someone checking in on them, how someone was there, making them feel good and comfortable, those things really help them through that situation. And so that might be something you can do even if it doesn't feel like it's helping you. The ultimate goal of anything in this situation is to make sure she's safe. You might think that the ultimate goal is that she leaves her partner, and I get why you'd feel that way. But we need to remember the ultimate goal is she is safe. That whatever she chooses to do, that she is safe. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a second. And you'll see there at the bottom, this is something I've seen stressed a lot, and I would stress as well, is that directing her to professional help is the best course of action. That's why I say if you see these red flags, if you see the signs of high risk, you see these red flags, if you see the signs of high risk, that you call Halton Women's Place, you call the Assaulted Women hotline, because those professionals will be able to give you the best help, the best course of action, the best steps to take. So that would be my advice. The one thing I've seen a lot when I was researching this, what I knew before I started researching this, is that if you can help her get to professional help, like Halton Women's Place, that will be the most beneficial approach. Now, I've done quite a lot of talking, What I want everyone to do is, if you could at this stage, think, why would it be difficult for someone to leave an abusive relationship? Why would it be tough for someone to, acknowledge that what they're going through is abuse? If you could write some of those in the chat, we'll have a look and we'll have a discussion about them, and then I will show you the proper answer. So I want you to think, why doesn't she leave? Why would it be difficult for someone to leave an abusive relationship? Great answers in the chat and one in the Q&A. And we'll go through them, the answers that you guys have put up, because they're all very good. In fact, they're pretty much what's going to show up on here in a second. So we've got from Madison that they believe it's love, especially if they've grown up in an abusive home and they, that's what they've seen from their parents, from their family, that is love. It might be that they don't know that what they're going through isn't. She wants to make sure she gets her things and money from a joint home. Yeah, if you've got a home with your partner who's abusing you, if you've got a business or any sort of joint shared assets, it can be really difficult to leave because you don't know if you'll be able to actually access what you deserve from that. Low self-esteem, absolutely. Financial dependency, cultural stigmas, lack of self-worth and confidence. She's working from home. She doesn't want people to know anything. Yeah, that's obviously something that's particularly true right now. No idea there are resources? Absolutely. And that's one of the big ones where someone who's a friend can obviously help out, by pointing out those resources. If they don't know they're in an abusive relationship because they grew up in abusive homes, they didn't have any healthy relationships, yeah, absolutely. Financial dependence, and especially if you think how expensive it is in the greater Toronto area to rent a house. If you're on one income with kids to look after, that's practically impossible. Low self-esteem. She doesn't believe it's happening. Money. He's a good father. Yeah, that's one we don't think of as. He might actually be a loving, caring father, and it might be hard to be like, okay, now we're going to be divorced. They're going to grow up with a single mum. It might just be like, okay, I'll stick with this for the kids. Absolutely. Denial. There might be repercussions. Yeah, this is one we have to emphasize when we go in and talk to kids at high school and middle school sort of level, is that if he said, if you leave me, I'll kill you, that's a threat that you have to take very seriously. Like, why would I leave and put myself in even more danger? You'll hear from Deb Marshall, they've tried before and they've returned and now it feels hopeless. Yeah, especially, I think the statistic we have that we use is that a woman will leave her partner and go back to him 7 to 9 times. So if she's left him and gone back and keeps going back, she might feel like, well, what's the point? This is what I'm in now. Absolutely. Complete denial, afraid of fighting him legally, that will take all her money, and which she obviously needs to get started again. Yeah, absolutely. We hear horror stories about abusers using the legal system to continue to attack the person they were abusing. And that obviously drains all their finances, drains all their time, which prevents them from, working properly or looking after the kids properly. Absolutely. So these are some fantastic answers, and thank you all very much for them. What we've got is pretty much the same. This is a sort of condensed version. We've got another slide that we use in other presentations that's got twice at least as much sort of options, but basically what you guys said, all those things can make it hard for someone to leave. And the reason why it's really important to remember that is because when you're saying, oh, you're being abused, and she says, okay, and then she goes back to her partner, it can be really frustrating to think, well, why doesn't she leave? It's so obvious he's abusing her. She should leave. Sorry, pardon me. And so it can be really frustrating for someone to understand, actually, it's not as simple as just leaving. If it was, we wouldn't be dealing with abusive relationships as much. It's a lot more complicated than that. So it's important to remember that, especially when you have that discussion with her. Oh, I think I've seen the bruises, so I'm worried that you're being hurt by your partner. And then she gets defensive. It's important to remember that she might not be ready to do that. And again, just stay there, stay in her life, stay supportive and caring, And eventually, perhaps one day, you'll be the person that she goes to when she needs someone to help her. Now, what we're going to talk about now, sort of the last sort of section, is this idea of safety planning, which is so important to the work the social workers do at Halton Women's Place. As I said before, the goal is not to get her to leave. Don't get me wrong, obviously that would be nice and that would potentially be quite helpful, but that's not realistic, as we've just discussed. She might not be able to leave, she might not be willing to leave, and she might have good reasons not to. So what we need to focus on is how can we keep her safe? So how can we keep her safe when she's staying in the relationship, as she's getting ready to leave, as she's leaving the abuser, and then how can we keep her safe after she's left, after she's broken up or divorced him for good? Now, safety planning, as with everything we've mentioned in this whole presentation, is best done with the help of professionals. The social workers at Halton Women's Place are experts. They do safety planning all the time, and they will be able to help her out. So if you can direct her to Halton Women's Place, if you can direct her to the Assaulted Women's Hotline, that will be quite positive in terms of that safety planning. If you don't live in Halton, then your local shelter will also have people who are trained in how to safety plan and experts in it. But if for some reason those aren't options, there's a really good online interactive safety plan from loveisrespect.org, and I'll just sort of show you what it looks like. So if you go onto their website, loveisrespect.org, and you hover your mouse over the Get Help bar at the top of the website, you'll see that down in the By Yourself category, there's a tab called Safety Planning. If you click on that, it'll take you to a safety planning sort of thing, and there'll be multiple pages with a bunch of questions. So you'll see some here, for example, have you told someone in your family about your relationship? Yes or no? You don't have to answer every question because some questions don't apply to everyone. When I did this, I answered one question and it still presented me with a safety plan at the end. So you don't have to answer all of them. Perhaps you don't want to answer them. Perhaps some of them don't apply. That's fine. But if you go through, the more you add to it, the more comprehensive the safety plan will be. And once you're done, at the end, it'll sort of give you a printoutable version that she can keep if it's safe for her to do so, or just so that she can read and look at if she can't keep it for safety reasons. Now that we've gone through seeing it, naming it, checking it, we want to just quickly talk about what can you do. What can you do if you know someone who's being abused, especially during the lockdown? So the first one is keep your eyes and ears open. Times are tough right now, and people who are in an abusive relationship, they are in a more vulnerable position than ever. A lot of them are now trapped in a home with their abuser 24/7. Some of them might be, having COVID-19 used against them. Perhaps their partner is, going against custody orders and not returning the child to their mother because he's using COVID as an excuse. Oh, I don't want them to get sick. Perhaps the partner is paranoid about COVID. Basically now, almost more than ever, we see that there's a need to look after people in abusive homes because they don't have a lot of the supports that were there pre-COVID. For a lot of kids, going to school was a place that was safe. That's obviously not the case right now. So keep your eyes and ears open. If you see or hear anything, it's more important now than ever to do the see it, name it, check it, to help out. Stay in touch. Where if you can, call, video chat, even text. And to be fair, this is a good option for people who aren't going in abuse. We know that this isn't the best time ever and people are feeling lonely and isolated. It's even more important if you think someone's being abused. The only thing I would suggest is remember that her digital history might be seen by her abuser. And in that case, a call is probably the best course of action because there's no digital record of what was said on that call. So it was, I was just talking to Jennifer. She was just, just seeing how we're doing sort of thing, rather than a text message where you can actually see exactly what's been said. So make sure she's safe. Don't send text messages or emails that might put her in danger because she might not have control of her devices anymore or her privacy at all. Number 3, it might be a good idea to come up with a code word or a code phrase that she can use to indicate she's in danger. Or it could be a code word that says, call me now so I can, leave the room, so I can get away from him. Or a code word that says, knock on my door. Give a reason for this conflict that we're currently in to de-escalate, right? If someone comes to the door, we won't fight right now, it might de-escalate the situation. And that could be as simple as the code word being, oh, the weather's not great right now, right? Because you never talk about the weather. If she says that, actually something's not good. The weather's not good means the situation's not good. I need to call her, or I need to whatever. That's up to you. Obviously, the code word would be dependent on your situation. It has to be something that would be realistically that could be said, but something that you wouldn't say by accident. But yeah, the code word can be a very good way to help her so that she can tell someone she's in danger without making it worse. Number 4, provide supplies. For some people right now, getting groceries or getting the supplies that they need might be difficult, right? It might be that her partner is not letting her get medicine that she needs, or feminine hygiene products because he doesn't want to waste money on it, or I don't know, I'm speculating here. So you could be the lifeline for that, providing those supplies. And again, if it's safe to do so, but if it is, it could be a really good idea to provide those supplies so that she gets what she needs. And then the last one, and this one I think is really important for everyone watching, is encourage self-care. So encourage her to look after herself, do things that make her feel good and at peace. But also, as you'll see here, practice it for yourself. It's really difficult when someone someone you love is being abused. And if there's not much that you can do right now, because she refuses to leave, that can be even harder. So once you've seen it, once you've named it, once you've checked it, they choose to stay, make sure you look after yourself. And even if you're just doing it so that when they reach out, when they say, can I stay with you? Can you help me find Halton Women's Place? That you're able to do that you're in a place where you're able to deal with that situation as well. So I encourage you to encourage her to look after herself, but also to look after yourself, especially in these trying times. We're reaching the end of the presentation. It actually went much, much faster than I thought it would. So you'll get out of here soon. But this was a resource that Halton Women's Place put up on its social media recently. And it provides some really good advice. A lot of it was obviously talked about in the presentation we've just done. But the couple of things that I don't think were really mentioned was, I didn't talk about safety of the children. If you're concerned the kids are unsafe for whatever reason, Halton Children's Aid Society, and you'll see the phone number down here in the bottom left corner. If you're concerned for kids, call them, and they'll do what they do and make sure that the children are safe. And just up here, if you think it's not an emergency, but you still want to just check that she's all right, you'll see here there's a non-emergency number for the Halton Police in this middle right box. And they'll do a well-being check, so they'll just check that she's okay. Again, if you think it's an emergency, if you're worried about her safety, just call 911. But if it's non-urgent, you just want to check how she's doing, that number there can help. Pardon me. Now, these are some numbers that we've already discussed, but just to give you the Assaulted Women's Hotline, which is another resource, and in addition, Halton Women's Place. As you'll see, our phone number is 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Every single day of the year, there is a trained social worker by the phone who will be able to help you out if you're going through abuse, or help you out if you're trying to help out a friend. The numbers are right there. Again, we will take the recording of this video and put it up online. If you're unable to, you can also search Halton Women's Place online. But that actually brings us to the end of our webinar. I just wanted to open up for questions. If anyone had any questions for us, we're happy to answer them now. If we're unable to answer them, we'll get your email from you and we'll make sure that we respond to you in the next few days with the answer. So if you've got any questions, please feel free to write them up now, or to put your hand up and I can unmute you and we can discuss that. If not, thank you very much for listening, and have a great day. Hopefully this information was helpful. Well, thank you everyone for your thank yous. I appreciate that, and I hope you gained a lot from it. All right, seeing as no one has any questions, for those of you who are still on, if you need to, please feel free. You can find out how to contact us on Halton Women's Place website. But I will end this webinar now. But bye. Thank you very much for listening.